comparison, a situation that we've all been in before. You're late to an appointment. Find yourself quite late to said appointment, and you start driving down the highway, and speed limit on 128 might be 55, but you're doing 85 to try and make up some time here, and blowing by everybody, and then you're getting closer to where you need to get off, and you start slowing down. You start slowing down, and you want to make sure you don't miss your exit, and you might even be off the highway at this point. You're going so slowly. And you have now slowed down, and that is the comparison or the analogy that Jerome Powell would like to use for where the Federal Reserve is in this economy.
I was hoping
now.
This wasn't your analogy because I was going to be concerned for your cognitive welfare. Coming from Powell doesn't surprise me, but that was so incoherent. Like I knew this wasn't coming from you.
So that is the comparison. That is the analogy that Jerome Powell would like to use. I think it's a pretty easy thing to comprehend, but I am not sure it adequately describes the situation that the Federal Reserve
does he
finds
drive?
itself
Who thinks
in.
about? Would you ever use that analogy?
I think it's a pretty good way
Not
to be
here
able
in
to explain
Massachusetts.
to
The
a
way we
bunch
do it
of
in Massachusetts
lawmakers.
is you're in the far left lane until you're right up on your exit, and then you cut across 3 lanes.
Yeah,
That's how we do it.
Without a signal.
Yeah, of course.
that's how Marc Fandetti do it. But that was the analogy that was used, and I think I'd like to break it down a little bit because one, I'm not sure if it's an analogy or a metaphor, so maybe somebody can text us and correct me on that piece of information. But that is the comparison that Jerome Powell was using yesterday when asked about where the Fed finds itself right now, and I think while it is an easy to understand comparison, I'm not sure that it is a terribly useful one. You know, for one, Jerome Powell and the Fed have a pretty good reverse possibility
I got a better
here.
one. We're all in the back seat, and we have no idea where this guy's going. That's my driving analogy for Powell. We're all screaming
locked
at
in
him.
the trunk.
Hey, buddy, the exit's over there. You missed it 2 years ago when inflation was at 8%.
Novice Uber driver.
Yeah. Just
That I
leading
can
you around
relate
the city
to.
of Boston.
Get me out of this jalopy.
It does seem, and we expected it as much, that Jerome Powell might be taking a page out of Walt Whitman's book here. Quote, "Do I contradict myself? Very well, then I contradict myself. I am large. I contain multitudes." Not exactly what I want from the Fed chair at this stage, but I think that there are several different contradictory points that Jerome Powell is making. The most obvious one is very simple. At the last Fed meeting, the Federal Reserve decided to pause interest rate increases. At the same time, so quote from Jerome Powell, "Given how far we've come, it may make sense to move rates higher, but do so at a more moderate pace." Later, going on to say, "We still have a lot more to do." Those two things are, in my mind at least, directly contradictory. We can't acknowledge how far we've come while also saying there is so much more to do.
I really want the next Fed chairman to be a mute, i.e. someone who can't speak. It's not a word you hear a lot these days.
Yeah.
The reason for that is that he continues to confuse, I think, everybody, not just me, but those of us whose expectations for inflation he's trying to set, which is what this process is really all about. Of course, he's required to testify, but the sole purpose is to ground inflation expectations and strengthen Fed credibility so that, we believe he's going to get inflation or wants to down to 2%. I'm not sure his remarks are accomplishing that. Speaking for myself, I don't know about you guys and people listening. Let us know if you find his remarks insightful and confidence inspiring.
Yeah, I don't, but we also are pretty close to this and talk about it all the darn time. And I think there's nothing that he was asked and answered on that, furthered my opinion that, the Fed knows exactly where this is going to land. And that's the only piece that I continue to get frustrated by is there is in my mind, far too much predicting and not nearly enough admission of unknown circumstances.
Yeah, prediction is the least certain part by nature, inherently, of what they do. So
but if we're talking about credibility, is the forecasting piece necessary? If you're talking about, hey, we want
No,
a
I don't
Federal
think so.
Reserve that is credible, do they need to put out these forecasts then to build that credibility?
No, and they're not required to. And they're invariably wrong, which everybody's forecasts are. And I think they probably confuse people to the extent that they can help anchor people to 2% inflation. They might be useful. So there might be an ulterior motive to sharing those forecasts and hope that it becomes a self-fulfilling expectation or prophecy. But no, Mike, you don't have to share your forecast. We do a lot of forecasting internally here.
Sure.
And when I present it internally, I often do it with my tongue firmly planted in my cheek and served along with a big grain of salt, because forecasts are going to be wrong.
Yeah.
So the Fed could do a better job of presenting their forecast with humility and explaining the error bands surrounding estimates and not speculating where they don't have to.
Yeah.
And this is where I think Powell irritates me and others. He talks too much.
So in terms of, he may talk too much, and I may disagree with the path that they are on. But in terms of that path and what has been stated, the median forecast from the majority of Fed members here is that there will be another 2 interest rate hikes this year. That would bring us to a 20-year high in terms of interest rates, bringing us to, what would that be, 5.5 to 5.75 in terms of the interest rate policy that we are seeing. I'm kind of done talking about whether that's right or wrong. I think they should have hiked this time. Oh well, they didn't.
Well, but
That's
we won't
where
know
are.
until we know how things unfold with inflation.
Right.
5.5 could be perfect. 5, where we are today, could be right. It
Yep.
might need to go to 7.
Sure.
We just don't know. He could say that and leave it at that.
Yeah. So anyway, he didn't, and that's where we are.